Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Strange Places. Today we have a special guest, but as you've already probably read the title, you will already know.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure who watches YouTube videos without reading the titles, but glad to know they exist apparently. Today we're going to be looking at one of the strangest mysteries in modern times that still has people scratching their heads over 60 years on.
The Dyatlov Pass Incident, so named because it was an incident that happened in a mountainous region known as the Dyatlov Pass, though interestingly back then it wasn't yet named so, saw the deaths of 9 young Russian hikers who were also experienced skiers in the north of the Russian Ural mountains.
Now, people dying in the wilderness is hardly much of an odd occurrence, especially in the 1950s where the modern benefits of GPS and mostly accurate weather tracking weren't yet around, but it is the manner in which the 9 students met their demise that has surrounded the incident in mystery. Because 2 weeks after the group disappeared, they were found, but in one of the most strange and bizarre conditions for what they were doing up there. One body had a missing tongue. Most of the hikers were not correctly dressed for their situation. Some were wearing each other's clothes as if they'd been mixed up whilst in a hurry. A hurry to where? Well, nobody knows because they'd all died.
Their tent was collapsed and in pieces, the fabric not cut from outside but from within, by something. One victim had tried to climb a tree in such a frenzy that pieces of his own flesh were found in the bark. Oh, and throw in that some of the corpses were apparently radioactive.
Yeah, we'll get back to that, but first a bit of context as to the events leading up to the incident. Whatever happened on the eastern face of Holat-Siekl, whose name comes from the Mansi, which is a local obscure language, their phrase, Holaichel, or whatever that is, I'm not good at pronunciation, which literally translates in English to Dead Mountain, or if you don't like that one, there's also Mountain of the Dead if you prefer, which isn't at all ominous.
As an extra serving of creepy, if you weren't fooled with the whole no-tongue mystery thingy, the area is supposed to be the haunting ground of the centuries-old legend of the Zolota Baba, or the Golden Woman. Now personally, this is not somewhere I'd like to go and take a stroll, but that's just me. No, too creepy.
Yeah, me too, but only because I don't like hiking.
The goal of the expedition was to reach Ortaran, a mountain just over 10 kilometres away from the site of the incident, and over 70 from their start point in Vizhai. In the January and February months, aka when the trek was being undertaken, the route was ranked as Category 3, the most difficult. But due to the experience of the group, it was not deemed to be too much of a challenge.
Well, as much as walking 70 kilometres can be considered easy. They took the train to Vizhai, the last settlement before the bleak wilderness, and all 10 of them began their fatal 70-kilometre trek on the 27th of January 1959. Yes, not just 9 as mentioned earlier, because on the next day, Yuri Yudin turned back due to illness, leaving the remaining 9, Seymon, Nikolai, Rustem, Zinaida, Alexander, and 2 other Yuris, as well as Ludmila, all accompanied by their team leader Igor Dyatlov, to continue up the pass. Man, why do I always get the hard to pronounce stuff?
And so Yuri Yudin is the last to see his 9 friends alive ever again, or at least that what we know of. But hey, that's a mystery for you. We'll pick up again from the outside when things start to get suspicious. Igor Dyatlov agreed to send a telegram to their sports club, which was presumably in Yekaterinburg, where the group all attended the university together, on the completion of the route to Vizhai to Orton and back, estimated to take at least until the 12th of February to do, or 2 weeks in total after setting out.
The 12th comes, the 12th goes, and no telegram of any kind is received by anyone from Vizhai. Okay, so that's not supposed to happen, not a massive deal, but as the days went on things appeared worse and worse. Soon, and by soon I mean actually quite a long time, a group of students and others volunteered with every hope of finding at least some, but preferably all of the students alive. On the 26th of February, they found them, all dead.
But even accounting for this, something was still off, that of course being the weird things going on with the scene. The students' tent was half pulled down and covered with snow, which evidently had fallen in the 2.5 weeks or so since something, whatever it was, had happened.
It was found that most of the group's belongings had remained inside the tents, but they weren't anywhere near them. Later investigators also concluded that the tents had been cut from the inside, as if the inhabitants had attempted to leave the tent in a hurry and didn't even have time to use the door.
From the abandoned campsite, the search party followed 8 or 9 sets of footprints, left by a combination of half-shoeless and barefoot people, down to a wooded area just under a mile to the northeast of the campsite. At the edge of the woods, under a large cedar tree, the remains of a small fire were found, along with the first 2 corpses, but no clothes on them. The branches of the tree were badly damaged from an attempted climbing effort by one of the students. A further 3 more bodies, including Dyatlov, were then found on their own in between the wood and the campsite, which people have suggested that they may have meant that they were trying to return to the camp that they ran from when they died.
It took another 4 months to find the 4 remaining students in a ravine 75 metres south from the tree, under 4 metres of snow. The remaining 4 looked better dressed, and it looked like they had taken clothes off their dead friends, so that's why their dead friends were naked. Oh, okay. In other news, I'd never thought I'd say that sentence.
Also of note is a camera that Simon had on his body, which apparently wasn't recorded as being taken with any of them on the actual trip, and if that wasn't bad enough, the film was chemically corrupted by the moisture of the snow, so no images could be recovered from the film inside it. The first 5 bodies found, before May, had no injuries other than hypothermia, so it's likely that's how they died. However, the later 4 were found to have serious bone damage, the force causing them comparable to ones caused by falling from a great height or from some sort of vehicle crash.
Let's go survey the damage.
There are no cuts associated with whatever caused the broken bones.
So, a weird few things can be explained right off the metaphor. There are some sources that say the site of the death is marginally radioactive, and some have immediately pointed to that and screamed about an alien conspiracy, but there is a reasonable answer for why a campsite would be radioactive. Something I remember from back when my channel did mainly chemistry videos. Lanterns, as in the camping sort of lantern, as specifically the lantern mantles, or the bit that glows, in the 20th century contained 99% thorium dioxide, which no surprises is radioactive, so there's a likely source of radiation right there off the bat. Also, it turns out the one with the missing tongue, Lyudmila, something like that, had died face down in a meltwater stream, and to attempt to not get graphic and fail miserably, the presence of water helps accelerate the decomposition. Oh, okay. Combine that with animal scavengers. Okay, so that's why her face disappeared. Oh, I think I actually need to lie down. You take over.
So obviously, we don't know for sure what happened. If I did, I'd write a book on it, and I'd probably make quite a bit of money. But that doesn't mean we can't speculate. So what could have happened?
Well, there are generally 6 popular, or not so popular, theories as to what happened to the expedition, some way more feasible than others. We will explore them all just the same. However, there are about as many other theories as there are things in a set containing lots of things, including not limited to aliens, sex games gone wrong, inaudible sound, prison escapees, and the aforementioned Golden Lady. So let's go through some of them, starting with the silly and ending up with the most plausible because, hey, why not?
This one is my personal favourite, albeit completely unbelievable and crazy. It deserves its place on the list because, well, if you're going to speculate, then why not have this one? Well, here we go. Wait for it. Wait for it. A Yeti did it. Okay, well, before you think I've completely lost my mind...
Too late.
Most of what can be said about the Yeti can be said about general wildlife in the area. For example, bears and wolverines in terms of disproving this hypothesis. And the fact that the Yeti as a species doesn't exist, so there's that. But the animal version of this is still quite plausible. There's something in the argument that because of some of the bodies sustaining broken bones, an animal or, Yeti would have enough power to cause those injuries. However, this is quite quickly debunked when none of those who had the broken bones showed any signs of external injuries, as a bear, Yeti or wolverine would most likely leave scratch or bite marks.
Also, an animal attack is unlikely as the bodies were relatively well preserved, and more importantly, none of the food or supplies in the tent were touched. Add in the lack of any animal footprints surrounding the area where the victims' footprints were, suggesting an animal attack was practically impossible.
This theory suggests that the expedition were victims of military testing gone wrong and that it was subsequently covered up. This personally is the most likely as it accounts for the injuries and has historical evidence for the area, mainly due to the Red Army using the area for various weapons testings. Plus, cover-ups weren't unknown in the Soviet Union, especially during the 1950s. Take the Krychim disaster for example, and that only happened 2 years prior. By now, it's pretty much accepted that the Russian army had been testing parachute mines during this period. These particular mines are detonated around 6 foot from the ground, and they rely on a shockwave to kill. This would fit in line with some of the injuries sustained by the expedition, and the strange goings on with the party getting confused and separated is easy to explain if planes are flying low and fast, dropping bombs at you at head height. I mean, if that wouldn't scare and confuse you, then you must be mad. There is a photo showing what looks to be like a glowing orb taken as the last picture on one of the Yuri's camera, which could have been an accidental exposure, water damage, or a photo of an explosion. Parachute mines have been admitted to being tested in the area, so it's not much of a stretch to think that some of the weapons of the radioactive variety may have also been tested there as well. Now let's talk about the other part of this hypothesis, the cover-up. This part explains the apparent shoddy erection of the tent and the dispersal of the bodies. It has been claimed that the bodies in the campsite were staged to cover up the actual site of weapons tests.
This hypothesis does have some traction, as exposure and hypothermia can do strange things to the human mind. Also, I've been informed by educational YouTube videos. Actually, this sounds like your sort of thing. Do you want to do this one?
Now, paradoxical undressing is caused by hypothermia, and is a rather cruel condition, as it tricks the mind into thinking the body is too hot, causing its victims to undress. This would mean certain death in the temperatures of the Dyatlov Pass. Staggeringly paradoxical undressing is estimated to kill 30 to 50% of hypothermia sufferers. At least 6 of the hikers died of hypothermia, which could explain the lack of clothing worn by some of the victims. However, this hypothesis doesn't explain the cut tent and the odd injuries some of the bodies sustained.
The hypothesis, or should I say theory as many agree with it, the group woke up in a panic, convinced that they were about to fall victim to an avalanche, for some weird reason. In the frenzy, the expedition opted to cut their way out of the tent, either because the door had been covered in snow or the avalanche was supposed to be imminent. I can understand the logic here, as it's better to have a potentially easy to repair hole in the tent and get out quickly than be suffocated under tons of snow.
That's communist pragmatism for you.
The theory also explains that they were poorly clothed due to the rush to evacuate the potential coffin of the tent. The expedition ran to the woods in hope that the trees would slow down the avalanche that never was. Once the apparent danger had passed, or failed to be realised, the theory claims that they split into 2 or 3 groups. One of the groups stayed in the woods to set up a fire and act as their new campsite, and the remaining part of the expedition made their way back to the tent to recover the clothes and equipment. It is at that point that the expedition began to freeze to death, with the final members of the group taking the clothes off their dead friends. The final 4 to die were claimed to be killed by the fall down the ravine, which is also plausible.
Now, this theory, on the face of it, covers most of the bases and sounds initially credible, but once you start to pull at the edges, the theory begins to unravel. There is just not enough evidence to support the avalanche theory, as the location of the incident didn't have the telltale signs of an avalanche. Now, usually when an avalanche occurs, it changes the pattern of the snow and it leaves a wake of debris behind it, both of which were not apparent when the search party initially discovered the campsite. Furthermore, the bodies found within the first few days were only covered in a shallow amount of snow. These bodies would have been swept away and would have shown greater signs of injuries if an avalanche of enough power to kill the expedition had taken place. Many more expeditions have taken place since the incident, and none of them have reported avalanches in the area. Also, up-to-date surveys of the area have proven it to be very unlikely for such an avalanche to occur. Even in the unlikely event that all the criticisms could have been circumvented by, for want of a better phrase, the perfect avalanche, the topography of the pass means that any trajectory of the avalanche would have bypassed the campsite. The final nail in his very snow-filled coffin is that Dyatlov and the much older Solovytchev were extremely experienced skiers, and the latter of the two was studying a master's in ski instruction and mountain hiking. Their experience would have suggested that they would have been able to correctly assess the campsite area, taking into account the risk of avalanche.
This hypothesis is an intriguing one. Although virtually unprovable, it is still worth exploring. The hypothesis came from Donnie Eichar's book about the incident called Dead Mountain. Get it, because Dead Mountain, in which the author claims that the wind passing through the Hychel mountain caused a vortex in the air. On many occasions, if a wind vortex reaches a certain speed and frequency, it can produce an audible sound. Or not in our case, as alternatively it could also cause infrasound, or sound that is just below the range of human hearing. That has been evidenced to be capable of creating hallucinations and irrational thinking in otherwise normal humans, thus explaining the odd behaviour by the expedition leading to their untimely deaths. But however intriguing, it would be incredibly hard to test this hypothesis, as we don't know the specifics of the weather on that day in early 1959. So to summarise, I just don't know.
Me neither. But what makes this mystery so entertaining and interesting is that part, any or none of the theories could be the true reason for the Dyatlov Pass incident.
Yeah, the deeper you dig with the incident, the more paths you find that could easily just be the actual cause. I honestly don't know what happened to those 9 hikers in February 1959, and neither does anyone else. My favourite theory is the one with the infrasound. It seems quite logical to me. If there's no evidence for external forces, and then the 9 people there all collectively seem to take irrational choices, we must look for something that creates a collective sense of irrationality or delusion, aka infrasound. But hey, that's just me.
Now my personal favourite theory, excluding the Yeti, is that the expedition were unwitting victims of military testing. Soviet Russia was hardly new to crazy weapons testings, especially when the Tsar bomber was only 3 years later. But again, nobody knows for certain, so after hearing the evidence, what do you think? What's your favourite theory? Or have you even heard of one we didn't mention? Let us know in the comments.
Yeah, whatever happened in that snowy pass, now named after the deceased team leader Igor Dyatlov, will forever be unknown. All we can do is guess. So on that note, all that is left to be said is thank you for watching.
Did you enjoy the video? I hope you did, and if that's the case, click on this link if you'd like to see more, or just check out new videos every week. If you have any suggestions for new subjects you would like me to talk about, please feel free to comment below, and as always, thank you very much for watching.